This bad horror movie. Why Taylor Sheridan rejects his directorial debut. That's nothing like his Western movies and TV shows. TV writer, producer, and director Taylor Sheridan may have been popularized by his neo-Western series, Yellowstone, but as it turns out, he actually made his directorial debut with a horror movie that he now publicly dislikes. Sheridan has been part of the entertainment industry since the 1990s. Though he began his career as an actor, he eventually transitioned to screenwriting and eventually showrunning. Currently, he has his hands full running an empire of popular neo-Western and thriller series, but long ago, he dipped his toes into another, more unexpected genre. In general, audiences tend to be unfamiliar with Sheridan's filmography prior to Yellowstone. Few people are aware that Sheridan wrote hit movies such as Hell or High Water and Sicario. In fact, Sheridan still has his hands in the movie business, with one of his most recent projects being 2021's Those Who Wish Me Dead, an action thriller that he wrote, directed, and produced himself. However, the most obscure project on Sheridan's resume, hands down, would have to be his first ever feature film, Vile. In 2011, Sheridan made his directorial debut with a horror movie titled Vile. The film follows a group of friends who are tricked into taking part in a twisted experiment after helping a woman at a gas station. Over the course of 22 hours, the captives are forced to endure horrible pain, so that a chemical in their brain can be extracted for later use. According to Sheridan, this bad horror movie was not his own project, but was written by a friend who asked Sheridan to direct. Sheridan noted, "I kind of kept the ship pointed straight, Rotten Tomatoes." Essentially, Sheridan admits that Vile is technically his directorial debut, but he had no emotional attachment to the story, and really just stepped in for a friend. Additionally, his judgment of the film as bad isn't too far off. On Rotten Tomatoes, Vile has no critic score and a 30% audience score. Viewers were mostly satisfied with the movie's score, but found that the story was full of plot holes and were highly frustrated with the ending. Ultimately, it makes sense why Sheridan has stepped back from this film. Considering that Vile has nothing to do with Sheridan in terms of storytelling, it would make more sense to consider Wind River as his directorial debut. This 2017 neo-Western crime drama follows a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service tracker and an FBI agent who team up to investigate the murder of a woman on a reservation. Unlike Vile, Wind River is perfectly in line with the types of stories Sheridan likes to tell. The movie combines a bleak Western setting with a mysterious crime to create a gripping and well-crafted tale. Wind River is also a good representation of Sheridan because it proves what he is capable of. As both the writer and the director, audiences are able to see Sheridan's talent for words, and also his visual eye. The film is completely influenced by him and his tastes, which is not true for Vile in the slightest. Therefore, those who want to get a taste of Taylor Sheridan's earlier work should pick up Wind River rather than Vile. Taylor Sheridan has built his reputation as the modern master of neo-westerns, crafting gritty, character-driven stories set against the backdrop of the American frontier. From Yellowstone and its spin-offs to films like Sicario and Wind River, Sheridan's work is known for its tense realism, morally complex characters, and expansive landscapes. But before he found his calling as Hollywood's go-to storyteller of the West, Sheridan had a directorial debut he'd rather erase from history. A forgotten, low-budget horror film, so bafflingly bad that it's almost become a cult legend in its own right. The horror that shall not be named. In the early 2000s, before Sheridan's breakout as a screenwriter, he was just another struggling actor in Hollywood. Like many before him, he dabbled in different genres, trying to find his niche. It was during this period that he made an ill-fated attempt at directing his first feature film, a supernatural slasher called Whispering Pines. Whispering Pines was supposed to be a taut, psychological horror film about a group of hikers who stumble upon an abandoned mining town with a dark past. But what was intended to be a chilling, atmospheric thriller quickly devolved into a cliché-ridden mess plagued by wooden acting, laughably bad dialogue, and an unconvincing villain whose menacing presence was undercut by a terrible mask that looked like it had been bought at a discount Halloween store. From the outset, Sheridan struggled with the production. The budget was minuscule, forcing him to shoot in locations that were anything but cinematic. Instead of eerie forests and mist-covered mountain peaks, Whispering Pines was filmed mostly in a dried-out park near Los Angeles, with a few abandoned sheds standing in for the so-called haunted mining town. The actors, most of them unknown at the time, struggled with clunky lines that Sheridan himself had written in a rush to meet production deadlines. Scenes meant to be terrifying were unintentionally hilarious. One infamous moment involved a character tripping over nothing and screaming as if they were being murdered, only for the killer to wander into frame awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. Why Sheridan wants to forget it. As Sheridan rose to prominence with his gripping Western tales, Whispering Pines became his industry secret. He never spoke about it in interviews, and for good reason. The film was a disaster on every level. The pacing was inconsistent, the tension non-existent, and the characters as flat as the desert landscape he would later use to stunning effect in Hell or High Water. One of the biggest reasons Sheridan rejects his horror debut is that it simply doesn't align with the style he has become known for. His westerns thrive on realism, slow-burning suspense, and characters making difficult choices in harsh environments. Whispering Pines, by contrast, was riddled with over-the-top jump scares, nonsensical plot twists, and an ending that made The Room look like an Oscar-worthy drama. The final act, a nonsensical reveal that the entire town had been cursed by a vengeful lumberjack ghost, was so absurd that even the actors had trouble keeping a straight face during filming. Beyond the film itself, the experience of making Whispering Pines was a personal nightmare for Sheridan. The rushed production schedule, constant technical issues, and lack of creative control made him realize that he wasn't cut out for horror, or at least not the kind that relied on cheap gimmicks and low-budget scares. When the film was finally released, it didn't even make it to theaters, instead landing straight in the bargain bin of DVD stores, with a cover that featured a completely misleading image of a terrifying monster that never actually appeared in the movie. A lesson in finding his true calling. While Whispering Pines is a project Sheridan would love to bury, it did serve an important purpose. It taught him exactly what kind of storyteller he wanted to be. The failure of the film pushed him to refine his writing, focusing on strong characters, authentic dialogue, and grounded narratives. He realized that his passion lay in exploring the struggles of modern-day cowboys, lawmen, and outlaws rather than chasing ghosts in abandoned buildings. His next major project, Sicario, couldn't have been further from Whispering Pines. The film's tight script and relentless tension proved that Sheridan had learned from his mistakes. He focused on realistic stakes and the psychological weight of violence, rather than cheap scares and predictable tropes. The success of Sicario led him to write Hell or High Water, Wind River, and eventually The Yellowstone Empire, all of which solidified his place in Hollywood as a master of neo-westerns. The cult following of a disaster. Despite his best efforts to erase Whispering Pines from existence, the internet never forgets. Over the years, the film has gained a small but devoted cult following, with fans celebrating its unintentional hilarity. Bad movie enthusiasts seek out rare copies of the DVD, and the film occasionally pops up in so bad it's good horror discussions. Some even argue that the film has a certain charm, in the way that only truly awful movies can. Sheridan, however, wants no part in its legacy. He has reportedly turned down offers for anniversary screenings and outright refused to sign copies of the DVD when presented with them by overzealous fans. To him, Whispering Pines isn't a charming relic of his early career. It's a misstep, a reminder of an era when he was still searching for his artistic voice. Would Sheridan ever return to horror? With his dominance in the Western genre, some fans have wondered if Sheridan would ever take another stab at horror, this time with the expertise and experience he has now. Interestingly, elements of horror do creep into his work. The icy dread of Wind River and the suffocating tension of Sicario show that he understands fear, but he channels it through realism and human conflict rather than supernatural gimmicks. If Sheridan ever did return to horror, it would likely be a stripped-down, psychologically driven thriller rather than a traditional ghost story or slasher film. Perhaps he could even explore a Western horror hybrid, something in the vein of Bone Tomahawk, where the tension builds from isolation, survival, and human desperation rather than cheap scares.